Obama should be shot. Obama should be taken out in the woods and hung. If you don't want me to treat you like a nigger, don't act like a nigger. Like, his coworkers were saying stuff like this. You are the only person of color in the room, and you have an authority figure teaching your colleagues how to tie nooses and explaining how nooses were used historically to kill Black people. The fact that that person made racist comments, the fact that they, fired you very quickly, the fact that you had a track record of performing successfully under someone else, the person who hired you, those are all things that you could point to suggest that, hey, this race may have been a factor in this. If I had, $1,000 for every time an employer lies in those position statements they submit to the EEOC, I probably could retire. We're gonna expose what they did, and most people don't. My name is Tanya Baña, and I am an employment lawyer and employee workplace rights attorney, and I've been practicing law for over 20 years. Well, first of all, let me say, I actually spent the first 10 years of my career not representing employees. I clerked for the Chief Judge of Maryland my first year out of law school, and then after that, I worked at big law firms representing companies. So basically representing employers in employment-related disputes. And I did that for the first 10 years. I did that while I was paying off my student loans. But I'd always planned to represent individuals. I always planned to represent people, plaintiffs, workers. And so I started my own practice around the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And I think that I like how you framed the issue, because, I think a lot of people feel like you can't fight against big organizations, whether it's, big rich companies or the government. I think a lot of people assume because big companies are doing something or the government is doing something that it must be lawful. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And I always encourage people, if you have a question, it doesn't hurt to just reach out to a lawyer. I will give anybody 15 minutes of my time. Anybody. I feel like it's an obligation that I have as a public service to talk to anybody for 15 minutes, because 15 minutes is really usually all I need to assess someone's initial situation and at least be able to advise them whether or not they could benefit from the services of an attorney. And, if it doesn't feel right, you should talk to an attorney, because it probably isn't. Let me give you an example. You got big law firms out here stealing people's money. You would never think that a law firm would be out here taking people's wages. But, we just took on a new case representing a lawyer whose wages, whose commissions, origination fees were being stolen by a big law firm that knows better. We did a similar case a couple of years ago representing a former partner at a law firm, the biggest Maryland law firm. I won't call their name out, but everybody knows who they are, because we beat them. We ended up having to go to trial. But they were stealing wages, which is, by the way, a crime. So you have this law firm knowingly stealing wages from partners. And most of the partners, I think, were too embarrassed to do anything about it. And then they just ran into the wrong one, who was literally was like, you're not going to take my lunch money. And he went around to a bunch of lawyers. He came to me first, and I was like, I actually used to work at the firm. And I had friends there. They referred me business. So I didn't really want to do it. So I told him, see if you can get somebody else. And he went around to a bunch of other people. And I think 3 different lawyers told him, no, they didn't want to do it. They weren't going to do it. Law firms don't settle. They make you work really hard. It ends up being, really burdensome litigation. And so he ended up coming back to me, and I agreed to represent him. It was a 2-year fight. $820,000 in attorney's fees.
Say the number again.
$820,000 in attorney's fees. Yeah, because they filed everything you could imagine. They filed every motion. They challenged everything. It was what we call contentious litigation. And we had to end up going to trial. And of course, we prevailed. Yes, this is a very common strategy of defendants, rich, powerful defendants. That is what they do, because money doesn't mean anything to them, except when it comes to giving it to you. They don't want to give it to you, but they'll pay lawyers, millions and millions of dollars to resist doing the right thing. And so, yes, they absolutely will try to bury you in motions. And, we have, I guess we'll talk about AJ's case at some point, but, they will do all manner of things that have nothing to do with the merits of the case. Accuse the lawyer of misconduct, accuse the judge of misconduct, try to move the case to a different jurisdiction, try to move the case to a different court. They'll pull every trick in the book to try to make the litigation more burdensome than it needs to be and to drag it out longer than it needs to be dragged out. Yes. So, when AJ first came to me, I didn't agree to represent him off the bat. When he described to me what he experienced, it was really egregious, and I never disbelieved him in any way, shape, or form, but I just thought that maybe it was an aberration. Employment cases are notoriously difficult to win, especially cases where people ostensibly have been disciplined for doing something that they weren't supposed to do. It's very easy for the employer to say, you were late. Okay, that sounds reasonable out of context. You're like, yeah, you can fire someone for being late. It doesn't, and now this is not specific to AJ's situation, but just generally, employers can articulate any legitimate reason, any reason that facially seems legitimate for disciplining you or firing you. And that's all they have to do. They actually don't even have to do that. They don't need to do that if they've been accused of some kind of discrimination. But once they've been accused of some kind of discrimination, they literally only have to articulate some legitimate reason. And once they've done that, they've met their burden, they're done. And then the burden comes to you as the employee to be able to point to some other evidence to show why that reason isn't credible. So for example, if they're saying, okay, yeah, we fired you because you were 2 hours late, but then you find out that a rack of white people been showing up, 5 hours late, haven't been coming in, no call, no show, and didn't get fired. Well, then that puts a very different spin on it. It's like, well, wait a minute, why am I being selectively targeted for this discipline when other people have egregious, problems and they're not facing the same kind of consequences? That's when you put it in perspective. But it's hard to have that kind of evidence. The employer has everything. They have all of the evidence. They have all of the records. We're usually going to these situations with word of mouth from what our clients have been able to gather from at-will employment. And Maryland is an at-will state. And I don't know how the majority of states break down, but we're in Maryland. So Maryland is an at-will state. You can be fired for any reason, no reason, stupid reasons, petty reasons. You just can't be fired for unlawful reasons. So the unlawful reasons, there's things that are obvious. You can't fire people based on their race. You can't fire them because of their use of legally protected medical leave. You can't fire them because of the need for accommodations for pregnancy. There are things that are obvious. Generally, it comes down to you can't be fired for doing something that you have the right to do. You can't be fired for refusing to do something that's unlawful. And you can't be fired based on protected characteristics, race, sex, disability, national origin, the things that we all think of as being protected. How do you find that out? Right? No, how do you? We just hit the nail on the head. Like there's so many imbalances in this the civil justice system. And one of them is just an imbalance of information. Like before you can get discovery, you have to have a certain basic threshold of information to even get there, right? How does that make sense? How do I have to have the discovery to get the discovery? Well, of course that doesn't make any sense, but that's one of the ways that the system is really stacked against people whose rights have been violated, because you have to before you file that lawsuit, you have to have a certain amount of facts available to you that you have gathered on your own, whether, again, it's through word of mouth or through observing the work environment before you found yourself being thrown out. You have to be able to point to other facts to show what we call a prima facie, like a basic case of facts that would establish potential discrimination before you could even get discovery. So, for example, if you've been discharged, you have to show that you're in a protected group. So you would say, okay, I'm Black. You would have to show that you experienced some adverse action, you were fired. And you have to point to some evidence that raises an inference that there was a connection between your race and the fact that you were fired. And so you could show that, for example, by showing that the manager who hired you, who was cool, was promoted, and you got a new manager who made racist comments and fired you for the first, trumped up infraction they could find. The fact that that person made racist comments, the fact that they, fired you very quickly, the fact that you had a track record of performing successfully under someone else, the person who hired you, those are all things that you could point to suggest that, hey, this race may have been a factor in this. Being able to show comparator evidence, being able to show that white people engaged in similar misconduct and were not fired, or even more egregious misconduct, which is often the case, and we're not fired. So that's the kind of stuff that you have to point to. But again, there's an imbalance of information, an asymmetry that, why would you know that? Even if you see people like disappear, you don't see them disappear, you have to basically make assumptions, or you have to get information from people who may not be disposed to sharing it with you. A white person who is caught engaging in some kind of misconduct might not be inclined to go tell their Black coworker that they got away with something, right? So you see, this is already a challenge that we face. And one of the reasons that I have continued to pursue claims against AJ's former employer is because I have been suing them for a decade. I have a decade of I now have institutional knowledge of how they operate. I can point to the examples to show, when they fire someone Black, or they say you were conducting side business. Well, I can point to 6 white people who were conducting side business and weren't fired because I have receipts, accumulated over a decade. But most people don't have that. So it's very challenging to pursue employment cases. I mean, as in the complaint that we filed on AJ's behalf, the allegations in the complaint lay out the fact that other plaintiffs in AJ's case had the same experience that AJ had years earlier. So, tying nooses. This man was tying nooses in front of people back in 2007 and in 2015. And he did it to AJ in 2018. And people complained before AJ complained, and he was not discharged. This is a company, this is laid out in our complaint, that ostensibly has no tolerance for this kind of behavior. And yet multiple incidences that the plaintiffs have indicated that they reported were not addressed. No, in this case, I don't, because, I think their own records speak for themselves. AJ reported what happened to him in 2018, and HR, and this is all laid out in the complaint that we filed, and it's publicly available, that AJ reported it to Human Resources. HR did an investigation. They told him that his allegations were substantiated, that the trainer, who's considered a supervisor, was doing a knot training. So this is the instructor who's responsible for teaching them how to tie the knots that are needed in utility work. A noose is not a knot that's needed in utility work. But this man was conducting noose tying demonstrations and teaching people how to tie nooses, usually in classes where there's only one Black person, in this case, AJ. So you are in a trailer. This is an outbuilding. So, it's a relatively confining space. You are the only person of color in the room, and you have an authority figure teaching your colleagues how to tie nooses and explaining how nooses were used historically to kill Black people. And then you have other trainees, your white colleagues, tying nooses because they've been directed and instructed in how to tie nooses. That happened. And, we recently, I never stopped conducting my own investigation separate from the discovery we're conducting in the case. And we've had more people come forward who experienced the same thing. I think in the complaint, I think at the time we filed the last complaint, we had identified 11 people that happened to. So now the number is up to 14 specific, Black employees that I have identified that had that experience. And yet they would tell you that and they have said, this isn't who we are. They've made public statements saying, this isn't who we are. They have made public statements calling me an opportunistic lawyer, suggesting that this was an isolated incident. But we've identified, again, as the complaint said, as of the last filing, 11 different people that it happened to over the course of nearly 2 decades. And in AJ's case, HR did an investigation. The man was disciplined. The write-up of this gentleman says that he instructed the trainees in how to tie a noose, and that trainees tied the beginnings of nooses under his watch. So, and yet this gentleman was not fired.
This day.
Well, no, he has since been fired. When AJ made what happened public, then he got fired.
As a PR.
Certainly to me, it would suggest that he was fired for bad publicity, not for tying nooses, because they knew he was tying nooses in 2018 and he wasn't fired. The company has also said publicly that even talking about nooses, there's no reason why you would be talking about, it's obvious, it's common sense. There's no reason you would be talking about tying nooses in the workplace. What is the need for that? That by itself, I personally think should be a terminable offense. The company admits that there's no reason for it. And the write-up also talks about the fact how it memorializes the fact that the instructor talked about the history of nooses. But he was not fired in 2018. I don't think that that's actually true in terms of I think that there are lots of people of color in very visible positions. The CEO of the company is a Black man. The big boss of this $45 billion collection of companies is a Black man. So the issue, they have absolutely in the last decade increased the diversity of people in visible positions. But AJ was working in a, what we call like the field. The utility worker ranks have historically been overwhelmingly white men. And that is the group that, they brag about the statistics pertaining to the diversity of the C-suite, right? But what can be challenging to get them to find out is like what has happened to the utility workforce, which is the overwhelming majority of their employees is the utility workers. That is they are a lot more close-lipped about that. Yeah. So in terms of me specifically, I actually have my own case against them right now. Right, because growing out of AJ's case, because they have accused me of unethical behavior that if in fact I was guilty of it, could get me disbarred. So effectively, they have made accusations against me that could get me thrown out of my vocation, my career. It's false. It's completely frivolous. This is something that I can talk about as much as I want. I can talk about this as much as I want. They have accused me of misconduct, and the accusations are completely baseless. They say if somebody is coming after you, you must be doing something right. I have never, I hate bullies, right? Part of the reason I do what I do is because of the imbalance in power that persists in the workplace setting, and the fact that there needs to be people who are unafraid. And maybe I'm naive, or maybe I just, got a little thug in me, I don't know. But I'm not afraid of them. And, they can do whatever, they can say whatever they want. I haven't done anything wrong. And I'm trusting the system to exonerate me in that regard. But I have always chosen to take on fights that other people have passed on because they're too hard. Anything, if my clients are willing to do it, because as hard as it may be for me, it's 100 times harder for them. So if they're willing to do it, I'm willing to partner with them, to be right there with them every step of the way to do it. And I have made it a point in my career to save up my coins from representing big companies so that I can litigate my cases the way that you're supposed to, so that I can not make money for a year and a half because I'm working on a case where they're throwing everything at me, and I'm gonna be all right. Because at the end of the day, I have this is my mission. This is my mission.
You didn't bring the tissue that you brought.
Look, I'm not crying. Y'all go ahead and be here crying. But I mean it. I mean, you know, like people come to me in crisis. They're in trauma. And, you know, one of the things I love the most about what I do is after that first consultation, I would say 9 out of 10 of people who are clients, they already leave feeling some degree of vindication because they've made that decision to stand up for themselves. And that's a huge part of it. You know, when you are at work and like, you know, especially AJ and his peers in their case came to me and they're describing to me hating going to work. Like, I just want to go to work. I just want to, you know, and these are good jobs. Like, these are 6-figure jobs. You can make $260,000 a year with overtime, you know, with no degree. And you just want to support your family, but you got to go to work and listen to people making low-key racist comments about those people in the city, you know, or making overt racist comments. Like, I hate fucking niggers. I mean, you have to just be prepared. You never know what you're going to find at work. You just want to go to work and do your job, and you can't. And it's so disempowering, and it makes you physically sick. And then you stand up for yourself. You literally just want to have the workplace you're entitled to, where you can just be yourself and do your job. You make a reasonable complaint and you're fired. It is disempowering. And so there's a tremendous value just in saying, no, I'm not just gonna let you do this to me. I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna fight. And I can't guarantee to you that we're gonna win, but I can tell you this, we're gonna expose what they did. And most people don't. And that's a great question. So I would say, how do people prepare to come to me? They prepare as soon as they walk in the door of a new employer. Like, you should be prepared from day one. You should, from day one, have a journal, have something that you're using to memorialize what, you know, your ongoing experiences at that job. When you see someone getting a promotion and it doesn't seem right because they have less experience and you know they went up against somebody who's more qualified, who looks like you know, just make a note of it. Make a note of it, because by the time you feel like you're being discriminated against, you're probably going to be pushed out the door, and you're not going to have time to take anything with you. You know, and that's another point. Keep that journal with you, because they will take your journal and they will throw it away. I have had employees be discharged abruptly, and they have desks and they have workspaces, they have lockers, and employers that they don't think anything of, they will take your stuff. If it says anything about work, they'll be like, this is our property, and they will destroy it. You need to keep it with you. Keep it in your truck, keep it at home, because when it goes down, you're not going to have notice in advance to be able to gather your things. They're not going to be polite about it. They're going to be grimy, and they're going to try to steal your evidence. So my advice is, assume that your employer is going to discriminate against you. Keep a journal of everything that happens. You know, the low-key jokes about Kamala Harris. Low-key jokes about Governor Moore. You know, if it seems like people, like, they have the tendency to keep attacking high-profile Black people. I wonder if they're racist. You know, keep track of it when it's happening, because a lot of times, by the time the patterns are really obvious to you, it's too late for you to get the evidence. And those kinds of details, you know, we don't have to have photographs and proof. Just memorializing those facts, that's evidence. Absolutely not. Absolutely. Do not keep the journal on the company computer. Make sure you take it home with you. And you know, people, like, they lie. I mean, you know, that's the thing that I want people to understand. It's like, oh, you can't lie. No, they will. They absolutely think they can get away with it. We talked about discovery earlier. They don't think you're ever going to get discovery, so it won't matter. In the employment claim process, you know, for many types of claims, you have to file a complaint with an agency called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Before you can go to court, you have to file a complaint with them. And that process is designed to give you an opportunity to get answers about what happened to you, and to give the employer an opportunity to explain, you know, so that we're not suing people over misunderstandings. If I had, you know, $1,000 for every time an employer lies in those position statements that they submit to the EEOC, I probably could retire. I mean, they persistently lie because they think that they're never gonna have to back it up. And they're right. Like in the vast majority of cases, they're never gonna end up in discovery where you're actually gonna be able to comb through their emails and get the stuff that you know exists to prove your case. You're never gonna get there. So they lie with impunity, and they often get away with it. Tying it specifically to AJ, what I'll say is that, you know, and it will come full circle. When
Is this because you said other people, so is this like a civil suit?
AJ is one of 17 plaintiffs in a civil case.
Glad you said that.
Yes.
Let's leave with that. So it's more than this is not him.
And I have other cases against this company as well.
Because what people might do if they hear this, like, oh, it's just this one angry nigger.
It is not. I have been pursuing claims against these defendants, like I said, since 2013. I think the first employment-related dispute that I resolved with them was in 2014. This is a case where a young man was being terrorized by his coworkers who he was going into work and they were like, you know, Obama should be shot. Obama should be taken out in the woods and hung. You know, if you don't want me to treat you like a nigger, don't act like a nigger. Like his coworkers were saying stuff like this, and he went to his black supervisor to complain, and the supervisor was like, I had to deal with it. You just got to figure out how to make it work. Which, you know, that's not the law. The law isn't, you know, you have to go along to get along because your black supervisor had to do that 20 years ago. That is, equal employment has been the law since 1964. So you don't have to tolerate it. And the fact that other people may have chosen to do so is irrelevant. You have the right to go to work and have a work environment where people aren't saying shit like that to you. But to come full circle to, I acknowledge that I didn't agree to represent AJ right away. You know, AJ was like, talk to some other people, because there's someone else who had the same experience as me. And I ended up doing, you know, talking with a couple of dozen people over the space of about a month, and just letting them tell me their stories. And the stories were identical. The patterns were obvious. This was not an aberration. He was not alone. And one of the things that was so infuriating to me was the extent to which they tried to demonize this man and discredit this man like he's a liar. Like it didn't happen. They literally are telling people, because there was a photograph, they're like, well, you know, he wasn't there. That happened to someone else. And then, that was true. He admitted it. He said that. This is another time when it happened. He never claimed that the photo was when it happened to him. The whole point was this is a pattern. But they were telling people, yeah, he wasn't there. They left out the part about he was there the other time it happened. And that was infuriating, and still is obviously infuriating to me, that they, instead of, it would be so easy for a big, rich company to be like, you know what, we have a problem. You're right. We're gonna make it right. We're gonna be accountable. We're gonna be honest about our shortcomings, and we're gonna fix it. But they decided to take a different path, which is to discredit this man and others who backed him up. And they continue to do that to this day. Well, they continue to now they're trying to discredit me. You know, they're trying to get me disbarred, basically. That's their MO. That is their primary defense strategy, is attack the victim, attack the people who speak up and speak out. But I think that they have usually succeeded because people gave up, or because people, I am blessed. I'm not, super powerful and important, but I've been blessed to go to really good schools. I've been blessed to work in rarefied organizations, and I have connections, and people know me. I am recognized as one of the best employment lawyers in Baltimore. And so I have the same degree of presumptive credibility that they do, probably more. And so that's why we're going to keep fighting this fight until we lose or until we win.
Awesome. Do you have a website?
I do. It's my name, www.TanyaBaña.com.
Next time on Kontra Versi TV.
But I wanted to bring my brother on today
because without him, just to be frank, I may not be alive today.
Growing up in some of these neighborhoods, it's almost like you shame to be intelligent. You know what I mean? If you're smart, you look down upon.
Just know, sometimes that guy that you know can't stand, or you seem to have issues with, sometimes that's the beginning of a strong friendship.
Me not knowing we was driving in a stolen car. Me not knowing there's 2 handguns in the vehicle. You know what I'm saying?
I found myself on the news for kidnapping, carjacking, armed robbery.
And my mom just began to ask a question. You know, she asked me, how many young black men you think get shot every day? I said, what? I'm upset, I'm mad, right? I'm like, I think a lot of people get shot. It happen all the time. She said, that's not true. Just the neighborhood and environment in which you grow in, it happens all the time. But throughout this world, a world much bigger than just the environment and the neighborhood that you grow up in, this is not normal.